A group of about 60 or 70 students occupied the building, and the reason we did that was because the university management declared that they were going to gut the building out and change it into offices for, I think, music and art, and transfer it to what they would call like teaching facilities. And the point we wanted to make was that this building wasn't ever intended to be used for that. It was always gifted to students as a place for them to run, and for Glasgow University to first of all put someone in to who mismanaged the finances, and then to reject a business plan which was put forward by the Hetherington, and then to say, well, actually we're going to turn this into like teaching offices. We thought that was pretty outrageous and quite out of order. So that's one of the reasons why we went in and we wanted to occupy the building. But the other reason we wanted to occupy it is we wanted there to be a space within Glasgow city centre, or near Glasgow city centre, and within Glasgow, which could be run on a non-commercial basis and run on the basis of need, and not simply because not simply due to if you were able to book a room just because you had the money for it, had the finances available for it, but a free space which could be open for a variety of different societies, both on campus and within Glasgow wider. But it would also not just be about a free space for people, but it was also a political space. It was also about having an anti-cuts headquarters in Glasgow for the benefit of the wider anti-cuts movement. And I think we've been able to provide that role since we've occupied the place. First of all, we've had quite a lot of support, first of all, from people like Billy Bragg, Ken Loach. We also had the Scots Macar, Liz Lockhead, come into the place. We meant to have Laurie Penny, the New Statesman columnist, in, but unfortunately she couldn't make it. So we've actually got quite a lot of support from a lot of figures within society. We've also had Patrick Harvey, the Green MSP, speaking and defending us. I think he's also been to the occupation itself as well. And also as well at Glasgow University campus, according to a recent sub-city poll, showed something like about 35% of students who polled have been into the Free Hetherington since it was occupied at least once. So it's providing a role on campus. It's also providing a wider role for the anti-cuts movement in Glasgow as well, which is what we've achieved. But also more specifically, it's provided a thorn in the side of university management at Glasgow University, because while we've also taken over this building, they've also declared their massive cuts package against a lot of courses at the university. So we've seen stuff like modern languages is going to be cut. We've also seen nursing is going to be cut, and the Department of Adult and Continuing Education is also going to be cut. A lot of this is quite ridiculous because in the case of nursing, it's 99% employability for people who get a degree and graduate. So it does show up the cuts that all these kind of courses are being cut. The ones most obviously in the case of nursing, which is used by young working class women, but you don't see any cuts in terms of like finance or business. Those are being kept open. So it was obvious that the university were going to be involved in this battle with the student populace and with the staff over cuts. So the fact we've also occupied this building on the university campus has also provided a good focus for resisting the cuts at Glasgow University. And it's a large part of the anti-cuts resistance has been built around the Free Hetherington. For example, the biggest demonstration I think in recent memory at Glasgow University involved about 2,500 students, which assembled outside the Free Hetherington, was promoted by many of the people involved in the occupation. So that was one concrete example of what we were able to do. Also, a lot of our members were involved in the election or the attempted election of an explicit anti-cuts candidate, James Foley, who stood against the candidate of the right, candidate of the kind of right-wing establishment on campus, kind of unholy alliance of both the Tory, Liberal and Labour clubs, and he missed out on winning the presidency by about 80 votes, which is very significant because I'm a graduate. I don't go to Glasgow University anymore. I work there part-time, but whenever I was a graduate, or whenever I was a student at Glasgow University, the left would always or now and again would stand a candidate, but it was always quietly accepted that would always be the candidate of the right who would win, the candidate who had been able to get the support of Labour and the Tory societies. So to come within 80 votes of taking the presidency for kind of anti-cuts candidate shows that even at Glasgow University, which is still uniquely one of the few places in Scotland, and perhaps the only place in Glasgow in which it is acceptable to be a Scottish Conservative, shows that the way the mood is swinging, and it's good. I think it's indicative of the role occupation has played that's able to do that. But I suppose for a lot of people, what the first time they've seen the Free Hetherington was about a month and a few weeks ago, when the police attempted an eviction at the building, where the first I heard of it was I got a text from people who said the police were assembling outside it. So I came there, and over the course of the day there were about 100 folk in there, and the police operation was massive. There was probably over 100 police there. They had the dog squad, the helicopter flying over for 4 or 5 hours, and all that force was used to drag out about only 15 student demonstrators who were inside the building, who had slept over, to keep the building running. So they were dragged out, and one of them was actually taken away in an ambulance because of the police had given her a concussion. They'd slammed her head against the wall, and she was actually charged by the police for, I think, breach of the peace afterwards, along with a couple of other people, and they've had the threat of arrest over their heads for quite a while, until last week, in fact, where all the charges were dropped. So I think that was an important victory against political policing in Glasgow. But also showed a lot of people who were students who weren't necessarily supporters or involved with the Free Hetherington. Because during the eviction there were hundreds of people standing outside watching, and they'd done it during early morning, late afternoon, over the period. And they were able to see the methods the police were able to use. And on campus, I think both ourselves and kind of right wing have been, organised minorities. Taking maybe about 30 or 40% of students say that they back us. There's obviously a large section of people who say they don't know, they're not sure. And again, other polls of asking students what they think, there's an overwhelming majority, 60-70%, who said we don't support what the police did. And for us, we found it quite surprising the police would act in that way, because we always thought if the police are going to come for us, they'll do it over the holidays, or they'll do it at 6 o'clock in the morning, do it when there's very few of us, where it's difficult for us to get there. So we thought, we were quite surprised when the university came in to send the police during daytime, during course time, when there would be lots of students about. And I think the reason that they did that was because the management was under siege. It was under siege not only from the anti-cuts protesters, it was also under siege from its own staff, which had been on strike. And they wanted to remove this thorn in their side. They wanted to remove the occupation as publicly as possible. It was about playing tough to them. And they did manage to evict the people from the Hetherington. And when they did so, they had about 500 people on campus had assembled to watch, in many cases, defend the Hetherington. And after we were evicted, we took the next logical step, which was to march in the University Senate. And a Herald journalist, in fact, told us that he had guesstimated there was about 500 people on the march up to the place. It was quite considerable, the numbers of people who were managed to get up. So when we got to the Senate itself, we sat outside the clusters, and generally it's always been a political habit. What we do is we organise a demonstration and we march up to the Senate, and we demand that the University Chancellor comes out and speaks to us, and we sit down and we chant for a while. But this time I think people were, for obvious reasons, much more angry. And so when we got up to the Senate, we were banging on the doors. And by this point the police had vacated. I think they'd had enough. We were banging on the doors, and eventually some of the doors began to give way. I think that was what sparked people off, the idea that now we're actually going to go in and we're going to find the people who did this. So we managed to get into the main university building. We actually managed to get into the plush settings of the Senate itself. So we were sitting around with very ornate, large chairs, and we had massive oil paintings of all the previous rectors. including Muir Russell, who had previously organised a campaign when I was at university. He was trying to cut Crichton campus. So we're involved in these very plus settings, you know, stuff like you press a little button and you see these widescreen TVs come out of these ornate cabinets, and we also saw a little sign saying this is the oldest piece of furniture at Glasgow Uni, it's from the 15th century and things like that. And when we got in there, I think there was about 100 of us occupying the place. So you can see the look of fear in university management. We were doing stuff like moving the chairs about. It was obvious that they had lost control of that situation quite dramatically. The way we marketed it at that time was we'd been evicted from the Hetherington, but we'd upgraded into the Senate surroundings. So we'd taken the University Senate itself. And then later on, the university management said, well, if you leave, we'll give you and your representatives a meeting with the university principal, Anton Muscatelli, a man who's been driving through these cuts and who I think undoubtedly got the police involved. And that was obviously an offer, as they say, we could afford to refuse. So we didn't back into that. So later on, the security came to us, we've got a more interesting offer for you. If you leave, we'll give you the Hetherington back, and we'll give you a mass meeting with the university principal. And that is something that we got right behind. So that night, the night of the eviction, the night of the day we were evicted, we went back into the Hetherington. We took down the big wooden boards that they put in front of the windows. It was business as usual. So, and the press coverage we got for that was tremendous. You know, we had Evening Times covered. You're out one day, you're back in the next. We also had the Daily Record saying they had police sources saying, you know, that the head of police's the steam coming out his ears. Because at the same time, the police eviction was very, very embarrassing for the police to use that amount of forces, that amount of manpower to remove a student occupation. I mean, one of our representatives was on Newsnight, and even Gordon Brewer was saying, you know, this seems quite ridiculous. Student occupations were 10 a penny my day and never brought the police in. So the police were obviously involved in this kind of really quite embarrassing show of them dragging protesters out, hospitalising one, and then later on having to charge them. And all of that was for nothing because we got the building back the next day. In fact, not only did we get the building back, but we got a mass meeting with the principal of the university, Anton Muscatelli, who, as I said, is pushing through these cuts, and who the UCU, the University Union on campus, has said this guy's incompetent and we want his resignation. They passed that, I think, unanimously, or at least overwhelmingly. And also at the meeting itself, which was a mass meeting of about 500 students. Again, the vast majority of contributions from students, most of whom who we don't know from the occupation, said, you need to go, we're concerned about these cuts, the way you've acted towards students has been atrocious. We've also brought up the fact that Muscatelli gets more money than David Cameron, the Prime Minister. I think he's on about 260 grand a year. So that's also been brought up as an issue. The paycheck that he gets and the rest of the senior management group at university. So the anti-cuts movement at Glasgow University and around the Hetherington occupation is, I think, pretty confident that we can at least get one of these people's scalps. We're confident that we can force Muscatelli to resign after all this embarrassment he's faced, after what he's done, after the kind of opposition he's raised from even apolitical students on campus. But by forcing him to resign, I think that gives the anti-cuts movement at campus a lot of strength, particularly if there's the next principal who gets brought in knows his way of life and his paycheck are dependent on not agitating us. So I think what we showed at the university with the Hetherington is we can win real victories against the cuts when we organise much broader forces on campus. And it's not inevitable that we need to sit back and accept cuts. You're actually more likely to save services by fighting them than you are by being these kind of reasonable politicians, which Ian Gray would have us believe. So that's the experience we've had, and that's the experience which I think the SSP wants to promote, to fight the cuts, which is about direct action, about organising your community and not letting the law get in the way when people come for your job or your services or your benefits. And I think that's part of the tradition which will succeed against the cuts. Okay.